This is the land of Havilah, Exodus 16. Israel's at the oasis of Elim. They're living in tents under difficult conditions, over 1 million of them. Freedom's been no bed of roses so far, but a little faith would smooth things over tremendously. Verse 1. They took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. Comment, they're in the wilderness of Sin. The origin of the name isn't certain, but it's not sin as in evil deed. They started the Exodus on the 14th day of the first month of the year, which was almost exactly 1 month ago. Verse 2. The whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "We wish that we had died by Yahweh's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots, and we ate our fill of bread. For you brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Comment, suddenly Egypt was a paradise in their minds. In verse 2, they murmured. Psalm 106:25 says they murmured in their tents. 1 Corinthians 10:9 and 10 gives away the eventual outcome of all their grumblings. It says, quote, "Let's not test Christ as some of them tested and perished by the serpents. Don't grumble as some of them also grumbled and perished by the destroyer." End quote. We must meet difficult circumstances with an attitude of faith. Let's purge ourselves of grumbling. Quote, "Let's not test Christ as some of them tested." End quote. Coming up, as Israel should know by now, Yahweh has plans for them that he won't, quote, "kill this whole assembly with hunger." Verse 4. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from the sky for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. It shall come to pass on the 6th day that they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." Comment, he's going to rain bread from the sky, or from heaven, as many translations say. The bread's a foreshadowing of Christ. How do we know that? Because Jesus said so. Quote, "I am the bread which came down out of heaven," John 6:41. We hunger and die without Christ. In the desert there'll be bread on the ground every morning. The people shall gather a day's portion every day, and on the 6th day of the week they shall gather twice as much, enough for 2 days. Verse 6. Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, "At evening then you shall know that Yahweh has brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning then you shall see Yahweh's glory, because he hears your murmurings against Yahweh. Who are we that you murmur against us?" Comment, Moses says, "Why do you murmur against Aaron and me? As you can plainly see, we didn't bring you here. We're only following Yahweh's pillar. Your murmurings are against Yahweh. Be careful. At evening then you shall know that Yahweh has brought you here. In the morning then you shall see Yahweh's glory." So something's going to happen this evening and in the morning. What? Verse 8. Moses said, "Now Yahweh shall give you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to satisfy you, because Yahweh hears your murmurings which you murmur against him. And who are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against Yahweh." Comment, there's going to be meat in the evening and bread in the morning. Really? Verse 9. Moses said to Aaron, "Tell all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before Yahweh, for he has heard your murmurings." As Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, Yahweh's glory appeared in the cloud. Comment, there was glory in a cloud, no description given. There must have been a very unusual and awesome look to it. If anyone cares to accept it, it was a manifestation of Christ. Hebrews 1:3, speaking of God, quote, "His Son is the radiance of his glory, the very image of his substance." End quote. From that verse, any time we think of a divine radiance of glory, we should think of Christ, because, quote, "His Son is the radiance of his glory." Verse 11. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At evening you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am Yahweh your God." In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay around the camp. When the dew that lay had gone, behold, on the surface of the wilderness was a small round thing, small as the frost on the ground. When the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, It is the bread which Yahweh has given you to eat. This is the thing which Yahweh has commanded. Gather of it every one according to his eating, an omer a head, according to the number of your persons. You shall take it, every man for those who are in his tent. Comment, they're to gather an omer a person, an omer somewhere between 2 and 4 liters, which is between a half gallon and a gallon. Verse 17. The children of Israel did so, and gathered some more, some less. When they measured it with an omer, he who gathered much had nothing over, and he who gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. Comment, the miraculous bread was not effort dependent. If they gathered little, it wasn't too little. If they gathered much, it wasn't too much. When they measured it, it was always exactly an omer. It's a picture of grace. Grace isn't effort dependent. It isn't earned. It's a gift. Salvation is by grace, Titus 2:11. It's not dependent on works or effort, 2 Timothy 1:9. But Israel had to at least get out of their tents and gather, so there is a role for us to play in our salvation. But there will be no lack of salvation if we at least rise and accept it. Don't murmur against God and receive it as a gift. Verse 19. Moses said to them, Let no one leave of it until the morning. Notwithstanding, they didn't listen to Moses, but some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms and became foul. And Moses was angry with them. They gathered it morning by morning, everyone according to his eating. When the sun grew hot, it melted. Comment, 2 things about the bread of God. It had to be gathered before the sun grew hot, or it was melted and gone. And when stored overnight, it became foul. We must follow Christ daily, partake of him daily. The faith we had yesterday, we must renew today. God's word we lived by yesterday, we must live by today. Today's gathering isn't good for tomorrow. We should gather daily. It doesn't take long, but it should be daily, and it makes most sense to take care of it in the morning. The bread melted and was gone by the time the sun grew hot. Quote, when the sun grew hot, it melted. End quote. So we should dedicate ourselves to Christ early each day, if possible, by reading the Word, praying, committing ourselves to having faith, and not murmuring against God no matter what the circumstances, and then going out and doing, knowing God's going to come through no matter how it looks right now. If we're unable to do any of those things, God's gracious. But to whom much is given, for example, if we have the mental ability to do all these things, much is required. Luke 12:48, verse 22. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. He said to them, This is that which Yahweh has spoken. Tomorrow is a solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to Yahweh. Bake that which you want to bake, and boil that which you want to boil, and all that remains over lay up for yourselves to be kept until the morning. Comment, the 6th day of the week was the day of preparation, when 2 days' portion should be gathered. On the 6th day, bread could be kept overnight. It didn't spoil overnight on that day, and could be eaten on the 7th day. Israel should rest on the 7th day and not gather. The 7th day is the Sabbath. Verse 23 was the first mention of that word in the Bible. Genesis 2:2 says God rested from his work of creation on the 7th day, but there was no calling it the Sabbath, and there's been no commandment so far in biblical history for man to rest on the 7th day until now. On the 6th day, verse 24, they laid it up until the morning, as Moses asked, and it didn't become foul, and there were no worms in it. Comment, on the 7th day, verse 25, Moses said, Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to Yahweh. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath. In it there shall be none. On the 7th day some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. Yahweh said to Moses, How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Comment, Yahweh's question is, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Skipping way ahead, we know that men are not capable of keeping Yahweh's laws to perfection, which is the only way to obtain righteousness by the law. It's not going to happen. It's a strange concept until we learn it, that God forgives, but He doesn't clear the guilty. God forgives, but He doesn't clear the guilty. Now, someone might ask, if He forgives, isn't that clearing the guilty? No. Just to support the statement that He forgives but doesn't clear the guilty, let's quote the law of Moses. Yahweh said of Himself, quote, Yahweh, Yahweh, a merciful and gracious God, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness and truth, keeping loving kindness for thousands, forgiving iniquity and disobedience and sin, and who will by no means clear the guilty. Exodus 34:7. So why isn't forgiveness the same as clearing the guilty? Clearing the guilty would be, for example, letting a guilty person into heaven. That's not going to happen. With forgiveness, however, we're no longer guilty. God doesn't say to us, you're guilty, but I forgive you. When He forgives, we're no longer guilty. If He forgives us, our sin is no more. Our sin is, we could state it any of the following ways: covered, atoned, invisible to God, or non-existent to Him. It has to do with the work of Christ, how Christ removed our sin from us if we accept His salvation by faith. He didn't clear the guilty. He made us free from sin by Christ taking our sin on Himself. He took the punishment of sin for us. There's no hope of achieving blamelessness by adhering to any rule, such as by keeping the law of Moses, but we can be forgiven. Here's how to get it done. Quote, if we confess our sins, He's faithful and righteous to forgive us the sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. Verse 29. Behold, because Yahweh has given you the Sabbath, therefore He gives you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Everyone stay in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. The house of Israel called its name Manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. Comment, the bread on the ground they called manna, which was their word for what? Because when they first saw it in verse 15, they said, what is it? So we can hear them in their tents saying, pass the what, please? And the other says, you want what? And the first says, yes. And the other says, yes, what? And the first says, exactly. Coming up, an omer is a measurement. It's a day's supply of manna for one person. A certain omerful of it will never spoil. Verse 32. Moses said, this is the thing which Yahweh has commanded. Let an omerful of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Moses said to Aaron, take a pot and put an omerful of manna in it, and lay it up before Yahweh to be kept throughout your generations. As Yahweh commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. Comment, the testimony at this point is everything that God has said to Moses, everything that God inspired Moses to write down. Now it includes what Moses has written plus an omerful of manna. Eventually they'll be adding a couple more objects to the testimony, the 10 Commandments on stone and the rod of Aaron that budded. Together the writing and the objects are the testimony or record of what happened in the time of Moses. Verse 35. The children of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the borders of the land of Canaan. Comment, in verse 35, Israel will be in the wilderness 40 years, all that time eating manna, because in the desert there was nothing to feed millions of people but God's provision. Verse 36. Now an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Comment, Exodus 17 is next at landofhavilah.net, Exodus 17.